You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Wednesday, July 17th, 2013, hump day, middle of the weekday, starting that long, slow glide down to powwow on Friday, and another summer weekend to enjoy. We're starting to run out of those, of course. And phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny's in the control room managing our Truth Warp Drive, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. I want to start with a little bit of a programming note. Now, over the last couple of months, you have all sat very patiently listening to John Stadmiller and myself ask you for your support of Republic Broadcasting so that we could grow. And the good news is, because of your help, because you came in, you bought your silver and gold from Republic Trading Group, because you hit that donate button, because you responded to the 1,000-ounce of silver drive. Next Monday, July 22nd, the Republic Broadcasting Network is going to be available on the XDS satellite system, which means any AM or FM radio station in America that has an XDS receiver, which is pretty much all of them, a standard piece of kit, will be able to carry our programming on the air, which is going to make life a lot easier for people to listen in their car radios and on their little portable AM/FM pocket radios. And you all helped make this happen with your kind and generous support to our work here. So we're going to be able to reach a much larger audience, to get the truth out there, to find those Americans who are starting to ask the important questions in the wake of all these gates that are swarming all around the ankles of the administration here, and we're going to be able to help them guide their way to the answers here. Now, if you have a local talk radio station that you like to listen to, now's the time to contact them and direct them to Republic Broadcasting, direct them to our wonderful programming, and say, I am a member of your listening audience. I'd like you to consider carrying this show. Send them over to republicbroadcasting.org and just say it's going to be very, very easy to carry this programming on the air. And again, none of this would be happening without the generous support of you, our listeners. We don't get those big paychecks from companies like Monsanto and Big Pharma and Big Oil. We're definitely a people's network, the Vox Populi, and we're starting to gain ground and make progress. And you guys all made it happen, so download a cookie. I mean the baked ones, chocolate chips, not the browser cookies. And pat yourselves on the back, because working together is what made this all happen. So we're talking about the anniversary of TWA 800. For those of you new to our audience, TWA 800 was a 747 that was accidentally shot down by a test missile off the coast of Long Island. This is the 17th anniversary, and the official story originally was terrorist, 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 and then when somebody pointed out that there was an active U.S. Navy live fire exercise right in the area where this missile was seen to rise up from, the official story changed. Oh, no, there were no terrorists. There was no missile. All those 700-plus people who saw a missile, they were all drunk. They had no idea what they were talking at, and they came up with this wacky idea of a center fuel tank explosion and the plane just climbing thousands of additional feet into the sky, trailing burning fuel, and that was what all these people on the ground mistook for a military missile. And you need to remember, it is not all that unusual for these accidents to happen. The Navy was testing a system called Aegis CEC, which is sort of a promoted, expanded version of the Aegis system, which accidentally shot down an Iranian passenger jetliner, the USS Vincent. So these things do happen. And it isn't the accident, it's the cover-up that is damaging the government. But there's a new documentary coming out by Tom Stalkup, and when we get back from these commercials, we'll tell you the new revelations about yet another government lie. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking about TWA 800, The 747 that was shot down accidentally, was an accident, was not a dastardly plot, was shot down, was a horrible, tragic accident. These things do happen. The United Nations states that they are aware of at least 25 incidents in which civilian passenger airliners have been accidentally shot down by the military, and most of them are covered up. The Iranian shoot down by the USS Vincent was not covered up because Iran was really not on good terms with the U.S. government and was very upset that a computer goof in the Aegis system shot down one of their passenger jets. So we're talking now about 1996. And Tom Stalka, who has been one of the most tireless, dedicated civilian researchers into this horrible tragedy, is coming out with a new documentary. And in the documentary are 3 of the original official investigators paid for by the government to look at the wreckage and say what happened. And they have now gone public, blown the whistle, saying that they were ordered by the U.S. government to lie to you, the American people, about what happened to that 747. And in an era where, thankfully, we're starting to see more whistleblowers come forward about all this government malfeasance, it's turning from a trickle into a flood. And these former investigators are saying they were ordered by the FBI to ignore certain pieces of forensic evidence. And for those of us following the story, this is nothing new. We've known all along there was a massive cover-up about what was going on. Now, to be accurate, Tom Stalkup's documentary stops with the conclusion that there was an explosion outside the aircraft that brought it down and makes no comment about where that explosion came from. The link to the U.S. Navy exercise is supported by other investigators and other evidence. We'll talk about that a little bit more. Needless to say, we're seeing all this counter-propaganda flooding onto the net by the government saying, oh, no, the official investigation is what you should believe, and Tom Stalkup is just out there trying to make some money by exploiting this horrible tragedy and causing all kinds of pain to the families of the victims, all of whom were paid large cash settlements for wrongful death by the airline. And if it ever comes out that the airline had nothing to do with it and Boeing had nothing to do with it, they have to give that money back. So when they parade the families of the victims around saying, oh, yes, we trust the government narrative on this, you need to remember they have a personal financial motive. Now, as I mentioned before, over 700 witnesses saw what they described as a missile rise up from the surface of the ocean underneath TWA 800 and hit that jet. And the official declaration by the government is they're all drunk. I'm not kidding you. James Kallstrom said that on TV. Oh, those people on Long Island, they're all drunkards. They don't know what they're looking at. And the government was trying to sell this idea that the Boeing 747 had a spontaneous explosion of kerosene vapors in its center wing tank that blew the nose of the airplane off. The plane then tipped up and zoom climbed several thousand feet, trailing burning fuel, and that's what the witnesses all thought was the missile. But this theory does not work. I mean, the CIA created a computer animation saying this is what happened. And it's not just an animation where we simply make the plane do what we want it to. It's a simulation. It's based on scientific and hard engineering data. And then, of course, when everybody, including Boeing, said, would you share that data that you used to make the simulation, the government came back and said, oh, no, that's all classified, top secret. We can't reveal methods and stuff. You just take our word for it. We're the government. We wouldn't lie to you. But it has to do with, there are 2 problems with the official story. One has to do with what is called longitudinal stability of an aircraft. Now, most aircraft, except for the latest military aircraft, which operate under what's called controlled configuration, you have the center of gravity of the aircraft just a little bit ahead of the center of lift, so that as it flies along, if it slows down, it'll nose down a little bit and pick up speed. If it's flying too fast, it noses up, and it keeps the airplane stable without having to have somebody on the controls constantly keeping the front end pointed forward. It's naturally stable, longitudinal stability. If you lose the entire front of the 747 ahead of that wing box, the center of gravity moves to the rear of the center of lift, and the airplane is going to flip around tail first, like throwing a dart backward. So on that point alone, this idea of the 747 remaining stable and zooming up into the atmosphere several thousand feet simply would not work. The plane would tumble. But there's a more fundamental problem with the official story that absolutely destroys the credibility of the government's explanation, and it has to do with a topic I call the magic wing box. Because on the 747, that center fuel tank is located inside that structure, the wing box. And as the name implies, this is the main structural element of that airplane that holds the wings onto the fuselage. And we do know that the initiating event for this disaster destroyed that wing box because fragments from the wing box were found at the very, very start of the debris trail, which means it happened at the very, very beginning. Now, if that wing box is destroyed, the wings don't stay on the plane. And by the way, many of the witnesses reported clearly seeing the wings fall away from the wreckage of the 747 at that first explosion. But according to the official U.S. government story, those wings magically healed themselves, glued themselves back onto the 747, magically kept their position without the structural support of the wing box and the span-wise beams. And that was why the plane climbed thousands of feet into the air, trailing fuel. And that's why all those drunkards on Long Island thought they saw a missile. And it's the magic wing box, named in homage to the magic bullet that featured so prominently in the official bovine excrement of the John F. Kennedy assassination. So, anyway, there were some other incidents there. One was involving a scientist, Charles Bassett, and involved this strange red residue that was found all over the wreckage of the airplane. And samples of that residue were taken by one of the investigators and handed to an independent journalist, James Sanders, whose wife was a TWA flight service instructor, knew many of the people who were on that plane. And rumors were abounding it had been accidentally shot down. So James Sanders had the red residue analyzed and found it to be chemically consistent with the combustion products of a military solid-fueled rocket engine. And by the way, I double-checked this myself when I was living in Washington State. One of my neighbors was a retired military rocket engine designer, and he said, yeah, absolutely, when you have a military missile and it's starting to run out of fuel, or if the engine casing is damaged and it's not combusting properly, the smoke turns from white to red. And the official story is it was the seat glue. It was just seat glue all over the place. There's only one problem. The seat glue used on every single airline being built is pale yellow-green, and there is nothing you can do to it that will make it take on this red color. So the FBI and the NTSB hired a scientist, Dr. Charles Bassett, and they sent him samples of seat glue that happened to be colored red. And they said, we want you to confirm that this red stuff is seat glue so we can tell the world that the red residue on the plane was the seat glue. They didn't send him the residue. They sent him seat glue. And in his own official report, Charles Bassett said, I was sent samples of this 3M seat glue dyed with an orange-red dye. The NTSB took Charles Bassett's report, removed the reference to the fact that he had detected red dye on the seat glue, and took that, and to claim that, yes, Dr. Charles Bassett confirmed the red residue is seat glue, and that's why you should just absolutely believe the official story. So they were caught faking the evidence in this case right from the start, and they wound up prosecuting the TWA worker who provided those samples of seat glue to James Sanders, and they prosecuted James Sanders under an obscure law that makes it a felony to remove anything from an aircraft wreckage site, even though James Kallstrom himself was caught handing out pieces of the wreckage as souvenirs. So now they're waving around the families and saying, oh, you don't want to cause them any more pain. They trust the government. Why don't you? But as I mentioned in the first segment there, they all got huge financial settlements from TWA and from Boeing for wrongful death. And if the official story changes, they're going to have to give that money back. So there's a strong financial motive for all these families to say, oh, yes, we trust the government. All righty, we got a caller on the line, Mike in South Carolina. Thank you very much for waiting. What's on your mind? Mike, are you there? Did I talk him to death?
Hello.
Oh, there you are. My goodness. What's on your mind today?
Thank you for all the work you do. I have two things on my mind to pass on to you. If I'm not mistaken, the first one is the 800 flight of the missile. If I'm not mistaken, it's visually tracked by a monitor. It also has an override button that can redirect it to new coordinates, or it can explode itself. Is that not true?
Those are true in the deployed systems, but this was a test system and a test missile, and it may not have had all the safeguards. My opinion, my conclusion of what happened is that they were painting the incoming test drone fired from Long Island into the test zone. They were painting it with a targeting radar, and the 747 flew into the radar beam just as the missile came up and started looking for a target, and it just locked onto the wrong one, left the warning zone, and killed the 747 before anybody realized what was going on. Got to take a break for commercials. Stay on the line, Mike. I'll come right back. Pardon me. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking with Mike in South Carolina, and let me just give a quick overview of how the Aegis missile defense system works. We've all seen these giant guided missile destroyers and cruisers, the Ticonderoga class, the Arleigh Burke class. There are these giant synthetic aperture search radars all over the ship, and right next to them are these somewhat smaller antennas that are used for targeting. When it detects an incoming threat, the targeting radars will paint all of the incoming threats, identifying each with a code number. When the standard missile is launched from the Aegis ship or from an arsenal ship or anywhere in the fleet, that's the whole point of CEC, is that any ordnance anywhere in the fleet can be employed against an incoming threat. It looks for a radar return bearing that identifying number. And yes, you can change the targets mid-flight simply by pointing the targeting beam at another target. And what seems the most likely explanation for this horrible, horrible, tragic accident is they were painting this incoming drone with a targeting radar beam, and the 747, which was actually a little lower than it normally would have been because of another flight overhead going into Rhode Island. The 747 flew into the radar targeting beam, and when the missile seeker came on, it saw two targets with the correct code number and locked onto the larger one. And these warning zones were set up in World War II, and they are hopelessly inadequate for modern hypersonic weapons. And I think the missile just got out of the warning zone and hit that 747 before anybody knew what was going on. It was an accident. It's just a horrible, horrible, tragic accident. Mike, you had another point you wanted to make. Mike, are you there? Okay, I guess. Oh, there you are. Okay, the gremlins are at work on our systems today.
Okay. You opened the program with a number of gates that are going on to confuse all of us. And, Benghazi Gate, Zimmerman Gate, IRS Gate, NSA Gate, all the gates are going on. But you forgot one.
Which one is that?
Many years ago, several years ago actually, Paul Wolfowitz was president of the World Bank, and he promoted one of his girlfriends into a position, a $175,000 position, which caused a lot of raising the eyebrows. You remember that?
Yeah, but that was a few years ago, and this kind of nepotism is almost standard operating procedure inside America's ruling financial and political class. So I don't think it's. I don't think it's as great a scandal as NSA Gate, which directly impacts our lives. If Wolfowitz is getting a job for his honey, it doesn't really affect my life. It's a scandal, doesn't affect my life. But NSA spying on all of my phone calls and mails affects my life. Getting into my computers through PrismGate affects my life. The IRS targeting political dissidents, of which I am one, affects my life and affects your life. And so I sort of focus on those gates that really do directly impact the lives of the American people. All these financial fraud, I mean, we could add LIBOR Gate to the list. We could add Gold Gate because of all the obvious rigging of physical gold and silver prices. Wolfowitz and his little honey, as you said, it's several years ago, and it really doesn't rank up there in my opinion.
Well, it's Paul Wolfowitz, Commando Dog of Pussygate.
Okay, well, it's a cute name, but again, there are so many gates we can't keep track of them, and we do need to put the emphasis onto the ones that really do affect every single American. Because Rivero's rule of the news is, if it affects your life, it's news. If it doesn't, it's distraction, it's fluff, it's advertising. Do you have any other topics you want to cover, Mike?
No, but I think the motto is, what we're seeing here, Michael, is a moral destruction that anything could be bought out here, and this is what's really disturbing.
You know, you're absolutely right, and I made a comment on one of the posts at whatreallyhappened.com earlier today that we're always joking about how, well, it's not really a joke. The money junkies have turned Wall Street into a giant open-air casino, but on reflection, they've pretty much done that to the entire country. It's a giant casino where the House has an advantage that guarantees money will flow to it, and they don't care where you get the money. And I don't have a problem with people wanting to make money, but there have to be other priorities to make a society function correctly. Care for those who are hungry, homeless, certainly care and focus on the young, their education. But at this point in the nation's history, it seems like the entire system is all about generating profits and feeding the bankers, and all of the considerations are completely subordinate to that, and that is not a healthy situation.
Adios, amigo. Keep up the good work.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. Now, getting on to one of the gates, which is NSA Gate, Spygate, whatever you want to call it here, the ACLU has now released some documents confirming that in addition to tracking your location through your smartphone's GPS, tracking your location through the cell phone towers themselves, this nationwide system of automated scanning of license plates is now being networked together. These license plate scanners, which are located on the highways, certain important city streets, there are even mobile units on the police cars, were ostensibly to find people who had outstanding warrants on them. It turns out there's a second purpose. We'll talk about it when we come back from these words from our commercial sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this story coming out of the ACLU involving the automated systems that scan your license plates as you drive around your town or across the country. And this system was promoted to the American people as aiding the police in finding suspects in crimes, wants, and warrants. But it turns out, according to these documents provided by the ACLU, that the police departments, all of these license plate scanners, are keeping a record of every license plate, where it was scanned, when it was scanned, and they're keeping that data forever. So they're now tracking you where you go by your license plates. And they're doing this on innocent people. People for whom there are no warrants. People who are not suspected of any crime. We're seeing this grab-it-all mentality in this spying industrial complex that is emerging within our midst. Now, I'm sure the courts will argue that when you are out in public on the roadways, you don't have an expectation of privacy. But I think there's a lot of people who will go places in their daily business that they don't think it's anybody else's business to know. Somebody's, the spouses nag them into being on a diet, and they stop at the donut shop on the way home. They're going to feel very private about that. Why does the government need to know that? Why do the police need to know that you stopped at a donut shop? They don't. They absolutely do not. And I think part of the problem is ultimately going to turn out that with that sheer volume of data, they're not going to be able to really derive anything of real use from it. It's a huge amount of data. Think about, hundreds of millions of Americans driving their cars on the roads every single day. That sheer volume of data coming in, and we already know these systems don't actually work like they do on TV. Oh, here's a license plate, type it in, there's his complete life history. I know that's the goal, but we know that real world, that kind of volume of data is very hard to evaluate. Plus, if you've got mud on your license plate, you're going to get a misread. So it's going to be prone to errors. And I know a lot of people in the wake of the automated red light and speeding cameras got these little plastic sheets that go over the license plate where you can't see the entire license plate from any one angle. doesn't stop the meter maids writing tickets. They can just lean their head one way, get the first half of the license plate, lean their head the other way, and get the second half of the license plate. I'm sure those are going to be declared illegal. It's illegal for you to fight for your privacy in the United States of America. If you have a private life, the terrorist will win. And now we're hearing that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau wants to mandate the geolocation of every financial transaction in the United States of America. They want to know not only who you're giving your business to, but where you were at the time you executed the transaction. Why do they need to know that? So they can catch these politicians who are going over to the local bordello, and their expense report listed as a public relations firm. We know that that's done an awful lot. Have you ever noticed this spying system? It's spying on everybody. Apparently, when he was running for the Senate, even Obama was being spied on by it to find information that could be used to coerce his agreement to certain policies here. Now, there's a very disturbing story that came out of ex-Republic TV, basically saying that for all practical purposes, the NSA is now protected from any legal challenges under the Fourth Amendment. Now, we know what the NSA is doing is a clear violation of the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States of America. And we know the lawsuits are piling on already, massive amounts of lawsuits. And we are hearing of this bogus policy being adopted by federal judges that nobody has standing to sue the National Security Agency unless there's a criminal prosecution in which the police got the information used for the prosecution from the NSA. And so the judges are already saying no American has a right to sue the NSA for violating the Fourth Amendment unless they're already in a criminal prosecution. And we are now seeing from the U.S. attorneys an absolute refusal to prosecute when the NSA is giving illegally acquired information to the police department. So basically the government is saying, yeah, it's wrong, we're not going to do anything about it, what are you going to do? And what you can do, which is still legal, is keep your life private, disconnect from the grid. Get out of Facebook, get out of MySpace, get out of Twitter, all that stuff. You have a natural right to take whatever steps you need to keep your life private from a government that provably cannot be trusted with your data. We've talked about the Seattle APEC, where U.S. government intelligence agencies were caught stealing business secrets from conference attendees to give to political cronies. That has nothing to do with law enforcement and fighting terror. It has everything to do with making a fast buck. I've lost count of the number of government intelligence agents who've been busted for insider trading because they're peeking into somebody's business traffic and saying, oh, he's coming out with a great new product next week. I got to call my broker and buy stock in his company. That's illegal. That's insider trading. And don't forget, a couple of weeks ago, we had another NSA whistleblower come forward on ABC News that the NSA listens to phone calls from our serving military overseas back to their partners in the United States. They're listening into this sexy talk. Ooh, baby, I miss you. When I get home from the war, I'm going to, get out the whipped cream and lemonade and show you a good time. And the really juicy ones are being handed around like free porn. So this government cannot be trusted with your data, should not be trusted with your data. And you have every legitimate right to take whatever steps are necessary to keep your data private. For one thing, stay off that cloud. That's just wide open to surveillance right now. Now, obviously the political backlash from this continues to grow, and over at From the Trenches World Report, they've got an article on how this double standard of secrecy or non-secrecy is continuing to arouse the ire of the American people against the Obama administration, because we have an administration more paranoid than that of Richard Nixon, already using the IRS to target opponents, which was one of the articles of impeachment for Richard Nixon. And at the same time, the government is adopting a policy of you are not allowed to have any privacy or secrecy in your life. The government itself is becoming more secretive. They're prosecuting whistleblowers. They're literally telling their own workers, don't you dare go out and actually read about the NSA scandal in the public media, because that's receiving classified information, and we'll punish you for that. They're scared of their own employees finding out what's been really going on. Now they're out there telling these federal workers that if you suspect a co-worker of leaking information and you don't report it, you'll be prosecuted for misprision of releasing classified information. And we know what that's going to do. It's going to completely demoralize the federal workforce, because you're going to have everybody who's competing with somebody for a promotion, they're going to rat them out. Petty jealousies will surface. I don't know if you're a big fan of the original Outer Limits TV series. I certainly was. It came out when I was very young. I had to negotiate with my mother to be allowed to watch this show, and I really, really loved it. And there was one episode called Obit. O period, B period, I period, T period. And it was about a machine that could literally read the minds of everybody around it. And it was demoralizing the facility where it was being tested. And it turned out to be an alien plot. These machines were sent in and set up because it would demoralize the population to the point where they would fall with the stroke of a feather during the invasion. And that kind of psychological damage to a population of constantly being watched, of constantly being exhorted to spy on each other and rat each other out, does erode social cohesiveness. It actually was, toward the end of World War II, it was one of the things that hamstrung Nazi Germany. They were busy fighting the war, and their own people were busy spying on each other. And it literally locked up the entire society to the point where it couldn't function any longer. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the aftermath of the Zimmerman verdict, because I continue to see a very obvious propaganda campaign to keep trying to sell this idea, oh, there's a race problem in America, there's racism, there's going to be race riots, there's a couple of race tantrums, and it's just going to get worse from here. They're trying to fan up race hatred to split American against American. They did it back in the 1960s. When the entire American population began to unite as an American population in opposition to the war in Vietnam, the FBI, as part of its COINTELPRO, set about a program to create racial disharmony, including infiltration of the Black Panthers to lure them into militant actions that could be used to demonize them, the infamous Black Panther coloring book. The FBI informants literally set up and staged a riot at the Disneyland theme park in Anaheim. And all of this came out in the hearings into COINTELPRO in the 1970s. And they're trying to do it again. And I'm very, very gratified that this last weekend, following the Zimmerman verdict, that we didn't see this huge promotion of rioting. I mean, they were so desperate, they even took a video of riots up in Canada from the Stanley Cup from a couple of years back and tried to post them all over Twitter saying, oh, it's happening in Miami. Really? I didn't think Miami had giant mountains in the background. And we're seeing articles from like 21st Century Wire, race war on Twitter, Trayvon Martin supporters campaign to behead Zimmerman. And they're saying, what is this government going to do about this obvious racism? Well, the real question is the government itself creating all these calls for violence and murder? To create that racial tension as a distraction from NSA Gate, Prism Gate, IRS Gate, DOJ Gate, Benghazi, fragile economy, and the crumbling war agenda. They've done it before. Divide and conquer of the American people. Keep us quarreling amongst ourselves to make us easier to control. And remember, before the Zimmerman verdict came out, Twitter and Facebook were just flooded with all these, we're going to burn Whitey, we're going to do this, we're going to do it. Didn't actually happen. And that disparity between the online propaganda and the reality that happened in the streets, like Trash Can Man, who was an obvious setup, tells us all this stuff that we saw on Facebook and Twitter was just being generated by that multi-million-dollar software the government bought with your tax dollars to allow their propagandists to have 50, 60, 70, 80 phony identities on social networks through which they can put out this propaganda and try and control the public discussion. Over at MSNBC, Michael Eric Dyson is out there screaming, more white kids need to die for Americans to understand racism. They're fanning this up. They want riots because they need to have something to talk about that isn't NSA Gate, IRS Gate, Prism Gate, EPA Gate, Plum Gate, whatever. They're desperate for that. We're going to take a phone call here. Jim in Georgia. Aloha, Jim. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Martin Luther King Jr. just announced that all blacks need to boycott. This just came over the airwaves. To boycott Florida orange juice. Well, what we need to do is all the whites need to boycott all black restaurants, products, songs, movies, and do the same
well, I'll
thing.
tell you what we all need to do. We all need to sort of let this pass into history, because we understand the goal here has nothing to do with supporting blacks or supporting whites, has everything to do with creating a racial crisis in this country, because this government is desperate for distractions. As all,
I agree with you.
Okay, so I do agree boycotting is a peaceful form of protest, but in this case, I think all of this is being pushed, to promote agendas. Martin Luther King Jr. is part of this institution that profits from, dealing with racial discord, and obviously, if there isn't racial discord, the donations dry up, the media exposure dries up. We have too many organizations that are out there saying we're going to deal with this crisis, and then we find out they're creating the crisis to profit from it.
They want the guns, Michael. Right.
Oh, no question they want the guns. No question they want the guns. And as I mentioned earlier in the week, have you noticed this weird dichotomy? When there's a mass bombing, they blame the bomber, but when there's a mass shooting, they blame the guns.
Right.
And in both cases, I think they ought to be looking at these prescription antidepressants that have this very long, well-documented link with triggering insane acts of violence and suicide.
They need to let this rest, and people need to be in harmony instead of starting all this.
That's exactly right. Right now, the thing,
Michael, it's just like road rage. When someone years ago, when I was young, if I had someone riding my butt and causing me problems, I'd pull over and want to fight. Now I pull over and let him go.
Best way to handle it.
That's what you need to do.
Right. Best way to handle it here. Right now, the thing the government is most terrified of is the American people coming together as an American people with a common national identity that is focusing on the real cause of all of our hunger, starvation, joblessness, homelessness, impoverishment, which is that private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest, the very same banking system we fought a revolution to be free of, and a government in Washington, D.C. that has completely abandoned its role as arbiter between needs of the society and desires of the financial corporations. That's the real cause of all of it, and that's why they're out there trying. Okay, give me
Jim. They want to start riots if they can go get new sneakers and big screen TVs.
I'm sorry. I'm going to let you go here because that's not going to help the situation. And by the way, I went through the Rodney King riots in Los Angeles, and there was a lot of looting, and it wasn't always by any one particular ethnic group. And by the way, something that was not covered, after the riots were all over, the stores that got looted put up a sign saying, if you'll bring it back, we won't prosecute, and most of that stuff was brought back. People got caught up in the heat of the moment, oh, let's grab this, grab that. And in the end of the day, they all calmed down and they said, this was wrong, I'm going to take this back. And they did. They actually did. And we had people like Edward James Olmos and, I'm forgetting the talk show host, literally went out into the streets with brooms and they were helping to clean up the mess. Most people, when they're not really caught up in the propaganda, tend to do the right thing. We really are. All Americans, we're good moral people until we're sold the idea of being bad people because somebody in authority says, yes, this is what you must do. But as I mentioned before, the time has come for all Americans to unite together as Americans with a common identity. We're Americans. What color we are doesn't matter. What religion we are doesn't matter. What gender or orientation we are doesn't matter. We are Americans, and we have a common problem with the current government and banking system. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to grab a quick phone call here. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Brother Mike. I just wanted to call in, and I totally agree with you that people across this America stand down, and that's exactly right, Mike. They want to put a dividing wedge in between us. Listen, people, How many rounds did Homeland Security purchase for ammo? How many street vehicles did they purchase? This is the last thing people need to do, is act like idiots and go out and smash cop cars and store windows when we got a bigger problem called martial law. And what are these people going to do when these soldiers come in and yank them out of their house? It doesn't matter what color you are. People better wake up and take heed and look at the bigger picture. When Netanyahu on Meet the Press Sunday morning, if you heard him, said it's almost time to hit Iran. Folks, we got bigger things to pray about than to try to start up fuel oil over this situation that the judicial system went through. They made their judgment on it. Let it stand. Let it be at peace now, and get ready for possibly a major world war. Thank you, Mike, and God bless you.
Well, thank you very much for the phone call. And again, I know a lot of people think this verdict was nonsense. But we don't need to waste our time talking about whether it's right or wrong. My concern is how the government tried to use this case to create the illusion of race hate in this country. And because there weren't mass riots over the weekend, it cratered. But they're still out there trying to sell this as hard as they can, like that guy on MSNBC. More white people have to die to prove there's... And again, we get these reports from places like Oakland, where the police literally went away to allow the rioting to happen. We get reports that really the protests on the Zimmerman thing were peaceful, and it was only a tiny handful of individuals who went out to set fires and smash windows. Those are the FBI and police undercover informants. They're out there trying to create a crisis as a distraction from all of the things that are coming out about the misbehavior of the government and the banking system. They are desperate to get you to look someplace else. Misdirection. They're desperate to get us fighting amongst ourselves, whether it's blacks against whites over Zimmerman. They're trying to stir up friction between the pro-abortion and pro-life faction. Now we're seeing a resurgence of militant feminism to try and get men and women screaming at each other. Don't fall for it. This government has gotten away with these kind of tactics for way too long. They're desperate to prevent the American people from waking up and realizing we're an American people. And we've got problems that all track back to a single source. That government and that private central bank. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about a very obvious concerted effort to convince Americans that the Zimmerman verdict has resulted in massive racial discord. And we're getting all these stories. Oh, the riots are increasing, the riots are increasing. Nobody can actually seem to find them. It's a PR campaign, probably being managed by the same people who did that stolen Iraqi incubator hoax to get us into the war in Iraq. And I just reprised to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com the photograph we call the trash can man. That was all over the world's media to show that there were race riots in Oakland as a result from the Zimmerman decision. And we pointed out, this guy is committing an act of violence conveniently in front of an Associated Press photographer. He's wearing a hoodie, but he's wearing black leather shoes. There's a fashion statement right there. Who wears black leather shoes? Cops. And he had a bright, brand new, shiny aluminum trash can, which appeared to be filled with dry paper packing materials, and he was hurling it into a window. Now, in Oakland, in that area where this took place, businesses have giant trash bins out back, and the city trash cans are painted green. They're very heavy, so this guy had to bring that trash can with him. It was a staged shot. They're trying to sell you this idea. There's racial discord. Pay no attention to NSA spying. Pay no attention to the almost at the verge of collapse economy. Pay no attention to all those sons and daughters coming back from the war zone in those cheap metal boxes here. We've got racism. We have racism for you to look at. Well, we're not looking. And again, I'm sure it came as a major shock to the powers that think they are that there were not massive nationwide riots over the weekend. They were counting on that. They wanted to provoke that because then the media is not going to report on all these other scandals that are going on. Don't forget, this is the week Congress started investigating the IRS targeting of dissidents and started having hearings again on Benghazi. The government doesn't want you paying attention to any of that. They want you looking at some undercover FBI informant, screaming about killing Whitey and throwing things through windows. That's what they want you to look at. And it didn't work. Now, Eric Holder is out there again attacking the so-called stand your ground laws, which more than 30 states now have those. The idea, and this is an extension of what is called the castle laws, or the castle clause, where if you're in your home, as in a man's home is his castle, and somebody breaks in, you may repel using lethal force without a direct threat to your own life. Prior to the castle clause on these laws, the idea was that if somebody broke into your home, and as long as they didn't say, I'm going to kill you or brandish a weapon at you, you were not allowed to basically interfere with them while they took your TV and your jewelry and, your porn collection. And they changed that because too many people were waiting too long to defend themselves and wound up getting hurt and killed. Well, the Stand Your Ground law attempted to take that into the streets, saying that if you're just going about your business and not doing anything and you are accosted by a criminal, that you don't have to give in to the criminal and run. And now Holder is saying, we've got to strike that down so we can avoid more Trayvon Martins. In other words, the U.S. government agenda is now to make defending yourself against criminals illegal. And if they do that, well then, hey, you don't need personal firearms. It's illegal for you to use them on those hard-working criminals who deserve a safe work environment, I might add. So it's all part of that, make you all helpless, make you dependent on the government. And we already know the police are never there in time to thwart a crime. They just show up and pick up the bodies. We'll be right back. And aloha, welcome back to our show here, and we're talking about how Attorney General Holder is out there saying these stand-your-ground laws have to go away here. We can't have the victims of crimes thinking they have a right to stand up to the criminals. We have to have a safe work environment for those criminals to go out and do what they're doing because it's practically the only part of the economy that's still running. And, of course, once they can sell the idea that you don't have a right to defend yourself from crime, that's the next step along the path to, well, then you don't need any guns. Because the opposition to Obama's gun grab has been focusing on the idea of a right to defend yourself and your home from crime in a nation where the police generally don't show up to take care of crime. They certainly are not there at the time the crime happens. Criminals know if they see a police car or a police uniform, they're going to behave themselves until the car and the uniform is gone. Then they're going to go out and break into somebody's home or mug somebody or rape somebody. And the police won't be there in time. Average wait time on a 911 call in the United States of America is about 20 minutes. And by that time, the crime is over and done with, and the police are happy to show up in their shiny uniforms and badges and buttons in their shiny car and pose with the newspaper photographers over the dead body and say, we promise justice and retribution, which also doesn't happen. If you have no criminal record and you go into a convenience store in some other part of your city where you've never been and stage a robbery, there is less than a 1 in 33 chance you will be arrested for the crime. We were talking yesterday about over in Great Britain because of budget cutbacks. The police are ignoring 45% of all reported crime. And so that's basically the reality. The police aren't going to be there to thwart a crime in progress. And the pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment people were out there saying, well, let's set aside this idea of defense against tyranny, which is why we have that Second Amendment to the Constitution, and just focus on the fact that we have a right to keep and bear arms equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals. We know so the criminals are getting their guns from Fast and Furious, and they've got all these military-style weapons that the government wants to take away from you. So now we're seeing Eric Holder come on out and try and launch this idea that we as Americans actually don't have a legal right to defend ourselves against the criminals. Just stand there, let the guy rape you, and then wait for the police to show up and express sympathy for you. And because you're not allowed to fight back any longer, well, then you really don't need to have guns in your home to defend against criminals. That's where this is going. It makes absolutely no sense at all to tell Americans they don't have a right to defend themselves from criminals in a nation where the police are woefully ineffective. All right, we're going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Michael in North Carolina. Aloha, Michael. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. What's going on? This kills me. Yeah, let's. If a criminal is a professional criminal, let's give him health care.
You mean Congress?
Yeah. You know, when I retreat to my backyard, I'll know that if he slips and falls in my house, he'll be covered by health care.
That's true. That's true. We got to put all these criminals on Obamacare right now.
This is there's a talk show here in Charlotte that's pretty liberal, and I called in last night, and they kept me on for like forever because I was just pointing out how ridiculous what Eric Holder said. I mean, it was just ridiculous. Like, I, as a person in my own home in North Carolina, thankfully they changed the law. But a year ago, if somebody broke in, I could shoot them through the door, but as soon as they crossed my threshold, couldn't shoot them, had to retreat.
Yeah, it was very, very bogus here. And I've been in that situation. When I was still living in Southern California, we caught somebody in our home. And thankfully, I did not have to pull the trigger on that occasion. I just put that laser dot on the forehead. And he skedaddled. And I called the police to report the crime. They never showed up. Because they don't want to take crime reports where citizens have thwarted a crime because it makes the cops look bad. And yet we know from the latest statistics, every year there's something like 1,600,000 crimes that are stopped in progress by U.S. citizens, law-abiding citizens with legally owned firearms. And they don't want you to hear that. You know, they want you dependent on the police force.
The whole thing stemming from the Zimmerman trial, which is just making me sick over this whole week, so I don't even tune into TV anymore.
Okay.
But the whole thing is a lot of people are saying, well, you know, stand your ground. That means you can shoot anybody anywhere.
No, that's not what it means.
If that's what they think, because that's what's being fed. But and he asked my opinion on that, and I said, you know, if I'm George Zimmerman and I'm on a neighborhood watch, which is a good thing to have, I'm not confronting him. Even if I am Darm, I'm not going to confront him. I'm going to call 911 because I'm not a sworn officer. I'm not going to say, hey, what are you doing?
You are exactly right. You are exactly right. That's why they call it neighborhood watch. You are supposed to watch, and that's all you're supposed to do. And Zimmerman was told by the police dispatcher, don't follow this guy any longer. We've got some cops coming over to take a look at him. If anybody was covered by Stand Your Ground, it was Trayvon Martin. And you're absolutely right. This idea of stand your ground doesn't mean you have a license to go out and shoot anybody that you feel like. It means you have a right to defend yourself when you are being assaulted by somebody with obvious ill intent. That you're not commanded by the law to run and scurry away as quickly as you can. Which, let's be honest, that is the best option. If you're in a situation like that, it is the best option. Try and get out of there. Escape and evade. And you shouldn't resort to deadly force, you know, unless there is no other resort, because that's a tough thing to live with after you've had to do that. Okay, but American people should have that option. You know, I'm in a corner, you know, there's no way to go, this guy's brandishing a knife at me, I'm going to pop him.
And that's that was kind of my point. This is a very tiny adjudication. All right, it's a case that is being tried. It's one murder case that's being tried in a state. All right, murder happens every day.
Yes, it does.
But my point was, and because they called me on like all things firearms, my point to them and my point to friends at work was, yeah, I would have never done that. And I would carry a gun. I could carry 5 pistols. I'm not going to touch that guy. I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to call the cops. If he's not doing anything, I'm just going to call the cops. They come out. They don't come out. I'm not going to follow him. I'm not going to push him. I'm not going to talk to him. That's just the way you should do things if you're a responsible gun owner. You never instigate a situation. Never.
I agree. But we know because of Judicial Watch last week, finding the documents that showed the Department of Justice was spending U.S. taxpayer dollars to encourage and support these Zimmerman protests. They picked this case out of the murder cases and said, we can use this one to sell this agenda of racial disharmony in this country. This was being propagandized right from day one, because they're desperate to take the focus off of all these scandals engulfing the White House. They're desperate to take the focus off the economic disaster. They're desperate to take the focus off of all these foreign wars. They're trying to get us arguing amongst ourselves. And the good news is, so far, it does not seem to be working. And again, I rely on all of you listeners to be the voice of common sense out there and say it's really irrelevant what actually happened between Zimmerman and Martin. The focus has to be, how is the government using this to turn us against each other, to maintain their power and control over us all?
Yeah, I've been spreading that word. Mike, I live in an all-black neighborhood. I'm one of the two white families in this neighborhood, and I've talked to my neighbors, and I've broken it down with them, and have kind of tried to absorb what they think also. But then kind of giving my own opinion, and there's been a couple that were, a little hostile, but most people are like, well, I had one woman say, older black woman, she goes, I care about losing this young man. She said, but what about the 25 kids that have been killed in Detroit in the past 2 months?
Yes.
I care more about them.
Yes. One of the things that really angered me over this whole Trayvon Martin situation was they're coming out there and saying, the parents of Trayvon Martin have had to suffer a pain no parent should have to go through. Well, doesn't that also apply to the parents of our sons and daughters being killed and crippled in all these wars of conquest? Why are their deaths acceptable and to be glorified and blessed, and this other one, oh, the parents have suffered so mightily? Yes, the parents have suffered. And yes, they should not have had to watch the death of their own child. But that applies to every other parent in America who watches their own children die in war zones.
Wait, Mike, we're fighting wars overseas?
Yeah, afraid so.
Oh, I forgot. Take it easy, bud.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Robert in Missouri. Aloha, Robert. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, been off the grid phone-wise for 2 weeks. I jumped in the pool on the 4th with my smartphone, and I've been testing to see how long I could go without getting a new one, so I got one yesterday. It wasn't bad. I didn't even detox too bad.
Well, I got a message from the NSA saying, where'd this guy go? We can't find him anymore.
Yeah, they're probably freaking out. But I've been watching this, and, I live in St. Louis here, and I work with it's a very mixed crowd at my job, and I talk to the people all the time.
Okay, Robert, we're gonna have to take a break for commercials. Don't go away. I'm going to come back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Robert in Missouri. Robert, if you would please pick up where you left off.
All right. But yeah, I work with a big mixed crowd. Culturally, racially at my job, and I've been talking to people about it lately, and what I've really noticed is the people with the most emotional, craziest opinions about the whole thing have the least amount of information about the details of the case itself.
Imagine my shock.
Yeah, and I'm like, I talked to a young black guy I work with yesterday, and first thing I was like, well, what do you think? Because I told him about this a year ago. I saw it. I was like, look, they're going to use this thing, and it's going to brew up some racial garbage. Mm-hmm. I told him about this a year ago. I was like, you remember what I said a year ago? And he's like, he was emotional. He said, Zimmerman's a dead man walking. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, really? After everything I've tried, I've given this guy documentaries. I've broke down agents provocateurs. I broke down false flag terror. I broke down, psychological operations to them. And, but some, people, as they spoon feed this media into their mind, it's gonna poison their sense of judgment. And people have to realize MSNBC, the stuff coming out of this network, this stuff is off the charts. I think they've pulled out every stop.
They really have, but again, the absence of massive riots over the weekend shows it's not working. And by the way, something you ought to consider. This guy that you're talking to who's out there screaming about Zimmerman's got to die, he could easily be an undercover FBI informant. They do have them all over the country. They don't keep these guys in closets when they're not actually doing anything. And most Americans are probably unaware that as they go about their daily lives, some of the people that they're interacting with are undercover FBI informants. And the way the system works is they recruit these guys in college, okay, like they tried to recruit me. And, you know, they have them infiltrating into various groups and keeping an eye on things. And as these people leave school, they're still part of the network. And they go into businesses and the workplace or government offices. But they're still part of that informant network. And the FBI has a higher per capita of informants here in the United States of America than the East German Stasi had. And, you know, they're not hiding. They're not living in the bushes or in closets. You're running into them every single day. And unless you give them a reason to interact, like saying, I think this whole Zimmerman thing is about fanning racism, they're probably not going to say anything. But they've been given their agenda. Push the racial disharmony, push this, push this, push this. And so when you see somebody out there who doesn't want to listen to the facts, doesn't want to listen to the history of COINTELPRO, who's out there saying, yes, we, meaning you, have to go break a window, you're probably talking, you know, with one of these informants. It's like Trash Can Man. I'm sure that everybody he's talking to, friends and families and coworkers who don't know he's an undercover informant, he's saying the same thing to them. We got to burn Whitey. We've got to do this. We've got to do that.
Yeah, and you know what? This new Black Panther Party, I mean, these guys stink of ADL, payroll, feds so bad. It's just like the garbage that comes from this group of people, and if people cannot spot these guys carrying around their weapons all over the place, I mean, saying the things they do, putting actual bounties on people's heads and carrying around the posters, and then still walking around free.
Yeah.
People can't tell that this is like a provocateur organization that's on somebody's payroll. I mean, it's absolutely insane. I wanted to squeeze in one more thing. I've been seeing and hearing all this stuff where people are actually going after the trial by jury system because of this verdict of this case, which I find just utterly astonishing that people actually are like, well, everybody thinks this jury made such a bad call here, people, the usual suspects, that the whole trial by jury system somehow needs to be destroyed and some new one implemented, which feeds right into the agenda.
It's basically let the judge decide, and of course the judges all work for the government. I mean, the reason the United States started that jury system was because allowing the judges and officials to decide the punishment for the crime or whether the crime had occurred was fraught with corruption, political necessity, and we know that juries sometimes do make mistakes. Very often they're manipulated into those mistakes by prosecutor malfeasance, defense malfeasance, and of course by judges who will issue them instructions that basically make it impossible for them to consider anything other than the desired verdict. We saw that in the trial of the 4 officers accused of beating Rodney King. The instructions that were given to this particular jury was that they had to conclude George Zimmerman intended harm to Trayvon Martin all along, from even the moment that he started the phone call. And that, of course, is an impossible threshold to reach. And so the jury, based on the judge's instructions, they did what the judge told them to do. And I know they're trying to get rid of the jury nullification and fully informed jury movements. But this idea that now they're trying to say we should forego trial by jury. I mean, I was already very surprised to find out juries in Florida are only 6 people instead of 12. And,
right.
But at least let's keep the 6 there. I mean, they're attacking what America is supposed to be about here. There's just no question about it. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Robert. Back with more phone calls after these words from our sponsor. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And looking over at the corporate media, I'm looking at the Fox News feed. They're interviewing the dissenting jurors in the Zimmerman case about how, we wanted to convict, but the law would not allow us to do it. It's a hard sell. This isn't news. It's a public relations campaign. It's an advertising campaign. They're still trying to salvage this plan to find some way to get Americans of white color to hate the Americans of the black color, who they want to get to hate the Americans of the white color. They're out there. Everybody's been given their marching orders. You will sell racial disharmony as what Americans should be looking at. Because we can't have them looking at the economy and the wars and all the gates that are just exploding across the landscape. I smell panic coming out of Washington, D.C. Back to the phones here. John in Barbados. Aloha, John. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hello, Michael. Basically, I want to give a warning to America and Americans. All these things that we've been talking about for quite some time on the subject of jury trials and what have you, and the self-defense and all these sort of things. All these things have been trialed in the UK first. First they took our guns. Then what they did was, when someone invaded your home, when you defended your home, your family, and your property, it was the owner of the home and the property that was charged and with a crime. And then they allowed the criminals, the robbers, the idiots who do these sort of things, to sue you if you damage them in any way. And so the homeowner then got sued. It is completely ridiculous.
We have already seen that. We've already seen that in the United States of America, where
they trialed it in the UK first. Then they trial things in Australia or New Zealand or any of the English-speaking world. And then it spreads throughout the rest of the English-speaking Western world. You know, it's this old empire thing that seems to, they do it in one country, see what the reaction is, see if it's successful, and then it's moved to all the others. And you really need to pay attention and do due diligence, because this is how it's going.
No, you're absolutely right. They want a nation. I mean, there is, organized crime is a reality in the United States of America. The drug infrastructure is a reality in the United States of America, and these drug lords don't want their individual drug addicts to be killed or injured while they're going out there looting the populace, because that cuts into their profitability. And that's why we have Eric Holder up there today saying, really, Americans shouldn't have an automatic right to defend themselves. I remember reading some stories coming out of Great Britain following their gun ban, that the British people were so afraid of the consequences of interfering with the burglar, that burglars would just break into the home while the people were sitting there, unplug the TV, and walk out with it, and the victims of the crime were just afraid to try and interfere because of the possible repercussions of, oh, you assaulted the burglar, you injured the burglar, you've crippled him for life, and you're going to have a huge settlement and sell your home and everything. And it's absolutely absurd. Common sense has to tell you, if you're in your home and somebody breaks into it, they don't have any rights to be there. They should not have any legal protections. We're in a situation where crime is being incentivized, not just street crime, but Wall Street white-collar crime is being incentivized and rewarded. Talk about a sick society.
Well, it is sick. I mean, the greatest drug dealers that I know of is the Metropolitan Police Force, and of course they don't like competition.
Well, no, that's definitely true. When I was in college at Cal State Fullerton, the best connection for drugs was this California Highway Patrolman. He was just confiscating it from dealers and saying, I'm just going to take your stash and not arrest you, just go away and don't complain. Then he'd sell it out of the back of his black and white, and he eventually had enough money where he quit the California Highway Patrol and he bought a Radio Shack store.
Yep. Oh, well, this sort of corruption is endemic, it seems, now in society. Of course, the biggest criminals are in the UK are in Parliament, and in America, I suppose, it's Congress, Senate,
absolutely,
and White House.
Absolutely. That's true. Crime is not only endemic; it's accepted. This is the way we keep the economy going. We don't have any agriculture, we don't have any manufacturing, but crime is big business. So we've got to support the economy by mutating the society into a criminal society, and that's exactly where we are today.
Well, as for the jury trials now, the jury trial in the UK has been reduced so that you're no longer entitled to a jury trial. In the old days, you could request one no matter what happened. You didn't go before the local administrative magistrate's court. But nowadays, beware America, it's happening to you. They've filed it in the UK.
It's already happened here in the United States. We've seen several states pass laws with regard to civil suits where damages have to be above a certain level before you can request a jury trial. We know that most of the small misdemeanor crimes don't involve a jury trial. It's an automatic. You go before the judge and he says, yes, you were caught littering, pay this fine, get the heck out of here. And so the automatic right to a jury trial is being eroded in this country as well, where they're simply managing us like livestock. You know, and again, I look at what's going on today, and I'm reminded very much of Terry Gilliam's brilliant movie, Brazil. And if you have not seen it, you know, go out to...
Brazil, I've seen it. What movie?
I'm sorry?
I say Brazil, I've seen it. It was a wonderful movie.
It is a wonderful movie, and it was so prescient. And for those of you who want a little backstory, when Terry Gilliam made this film, it was being distributed by Universal Pictures, and there was literally fights going on between Terry Gilliam and Universal Pictures. Universal wanted to take certain parts of the film out that they felt were going to cause severe discomfort in the audience. They wanted it to be a talk about this dystopian, tyrannical future, but not in a way that would make people unhappy with life in the United States as it was at that time. And I know there's a director's cut out there somewhere. But if you have not seen Brazil, you need to look at it because it was amazing how prescient Terry Gilliam was with that film.
Well, to me today, Michael, that what seems to be the case in both British jurisprudence and American jurisprudence, it's not really jurisprudence at all. It's revenue generation.
That's exactly right.
Because they're bankrupt and they have to generate this revenue somehow, and things are invented.
Yeah, they're pillaging the population. They're pillaging the American people, or the people of Great Britain. And one of the reasons crime is exploding out of control is because local police forces, their police are all focused on cases where there can be a civil forfeiture, like we're going to kick down your door, and if we catch you with a marijuana plant, we get to take your house. Or they're out there with traffic enforcement because those generate fines. And crimes that don't open up a financial opportunity for the police department and the local government are basically, they're not a priority any longer.
Well, the other thing that seems to be happening both sides of the pond is the militarization of the police, but they're reducing the numbers because of the dire financial straits that we're in. But now they're dressing up more like military armed units.
Oh, they are, and we're seeing a huge problem with, people being killed by accident. Wrong door gets kicked down. In this country, in the United States, I don't know what it's like in Great Britain, but here in the United States of America, you are 8 times more likely to be murdered by accident by a police officer than you are to be a victim of an act of terror. But, of course, we've got to be afraid of the terrorists, and we've got to oppose the terrorists. But love your police department. Don't carry guns. Don't defend yourself. Just wait for the police to show up. And it's a complete dichotomy. You're in much more danger from the police department than you are from terrorists.
Well, I had my house in the UK when I lived in the UK broken into. And you say it was 12... What did you say, 12 minutes or 20 minutes in the US for the police to turn up?
Yep.
Well, you're lucky. It took the police 2 weeks to turn up. 2 weeks to turn up to a break-in. Yep. Yeah. Well, unbelievable.
Did you have to feed the burglar for 2 weeks there? I'm sorry, the police aren't here. You can sleep out here, in the garage, and I'll bring you food and water every day. Yeah, it is. It's ridiculous. The police are rarely, if ever, there while the crime is going on. Years ago, before the police got into using encrypted radios, and you could still pick them up on your VHF scanner, you could hear the cops. They were responding to a violence call. Somebody's being murdered in this house, and you'd hear them sitting in their cars saying, "Do you think the guy is gone yet?" "Yeah, I think he's gone. I haven't heard any screaming for 5 minutes. All right, let's go in now." And that was the way they were treating these things. Remember that very infamous case in Georgetown, Washington, where these 3 women were sharing a townhouse, and some people broke in and started raping one of the women who was downstairs. The two women upstairs called the cops, called 911. We're told the cops are on the way, the cops are on the way, the cops are on the way. And then eventually the ruckus downstairs stopped, and these two upstairs women thought, okay, the attackers have gone, let's go check on our roommate. They walked down, the attackers were still there, took them prisoner, raped them, forced them to perform live sex shows. All night long, the police never showed up. These three women sued the police department and lost the case when the judge ruled that the police do not actually have a legal obligation to intervene in a violent crime. And that is the reality of life in this country. And Eric Holder's out there saying, no, 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 stand your ground. Forget that. You don't need a gun. You don't need to defend yourself from crime.
Well, I point to the riots in London a few year or so ago, and the police, they shot this chap in a car and claimed that he'd shot one of them. Actually, it was another policeman that, when they dug the bullet out of the police radio, it was actually one of their own. But anyway, they shot this guy, and then the family went to the police station to inquire as to why he was shot. And unfortunately, the police, a 16-year-old girl, beat the hell out of her. Yeah. And this caused the riots. But the police literally stood back for 2 days and watched, did nothing.
Yeah, we saw that in Oakland over the weekend. We saw that during the Los Angeles Rodney King riots. You know, the police just split, just let the thing go completely out of control for its media value.
Well, this is what I'm saying. They trial these systems in other countries, and if they work, it just spreads. It's crazy. We need more due diligence, both sides, and more communication between both sides of the pond.
All we really need to remember is that we should never, ever, ever trust government for the reason that it is the government. And history has shown us they love to play dirty. They live with this religious faith that the willingness to lie, cheat, steal, and kill to achieve their aims makes them superior, elite human beings, and it doesn't. It just makes them human beings willing to lie, cheat, steal, and kill to achieve their aims.
I believe, lots of these politicians, as far as I can see, are congenital liars. It's built into them.
Oh, they are talented. They are most talented and industrious liars. There's absolutely no question. If there was a lying Olympics, they'd be getting the gold. Going to let you go here, John. We've got another caller who's been waiting very, very patiently. Gary in Missouri. Thank you for waiting. Aloha. What's on your mind? Oh, Gary dropped. Oh, my goodness. Gary, I'm sorry. I feel really bad that we didn't get to you in time. Now, speaking of feeling really bad, one of our fellow travelers on the road to restoration of the Republic, dailybell.com, has had to cease operations. They're keeping their website up as an historical resource. You can still go there and look at articles, but they have basically had to cease the daily updates and research and so forth, and it's really sorry to see them go. And it is a reminder that when we get out here and ask you for donations, we're not just flapping our gums. We're literally running on a shoestring budget. In my case, it's a sandal budget. And we do need your support to keep doing what we're doing, because we don't get the big budget advertisers from companies like Monsanto and GlaxoSmithKline. We are not getting checks from shadowy non-governmental organizations with dubious backgrounds. We don't have angels funding us, with millions and millions of dollars in order that we would push a particular agenda. We are totally grassroots, and we do rely on you to basically step forward, because the only way we're going to get the big money corruption out of our society is for the little money to all unite together in that common cause of restoration of the Republic. So really sorry to see Daily Bell go. We link to a lot of their material, and it's very sad to see it happen. But I understand exactly why it does happen, and probably more and more as the economy dries up, as they suck the wealth out of the country to keep us helpless, to keep us dependent on those little pieces of paper and ink. Probably see a few more of those. Now, getting on back to the Michael Hastings story, and there's a very bizarre twist to that. Apparently, Michael Hastings' body was cremated and sent to the family in an urn, even though the family itself wanted to have the body for a funeral. They did not ask for cremation. Normally, that is something that is only done at request of the family, or if you're dealing with somebody who's infected with a pathogen that can't take the risk the body would be infectious, at which point cremation is how you sterilize it. Neither of those apply here. And so the obvious implication here is that there was something about the injuries to the body that directly contradicted the official story of, oh, he hit a tree. And so they just cremate the body and say, oh, our bad, we got the paperwork crossed, and now the Hastings family has hired a private detective to find out exactly what happened, how it is that his car exploded violently as it was driving down the road, just after Hastings had contacted various lawyers saying the FBI is following me, and I'm in possession of really, really damning information about the government's spy operation and Obama. So we're in an age of wet work. It's just a fact of life we're all going to have to accept, because the other side loves to play dirty. Like I said, they're not superior human beings. They're just people willing to lie, cheat, steal, and kill to achieve their ends. Meanwhile, in another very questionable death, remember that guy down in Florida? The FBI were browbeating him, trying to get him to sign a confession that would link the Boston bombers, the Tsarnaevs, with this drug murder. And somehow this guy, who had a leg injury, by the way, he was limping rather badly, after hours and hours of being told, you will sign the papers, attacked those FBI agents who heroically had to shoot him 7 times, including 1 shot to the top of his head, the kill shot. The FBI is now blocking the release of the autopsy on the body. Do they have something to hide? We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about the strange death of Ibrahim Todashev. This was the guy, 27 years old, down in Florida, was being interviewed over and over and over again by the FBI in company with some Massachusetts police officers. And the FBI's official story is that this Ibrahim Todashev was just on the verge of signing a confession that would have implicated those evil Tsarnaev brothers in a drug-related murder, when all of a sudden he went crazy. He hit us with paper clips, and they wound up having to kill him. And he was shot 7 times, including a shot to the top of his head. Kill shot. Right into the brain. Oh, we had no choice. And the FBI is basically has ordered the Florida Medical Examiner's Office not to release the autopsy report. Because the FBI is investigating, we'll take charge of the investigation and we'll tell you what you think. Probably along the same quality of investigation that they did in TWA 800, where we now know they were ordering the investigators not to look at certain forensic pieces of evidence, meaning the remains of that military missile. So they got something to hide. They don't want you to see the autopsy report. Maybe that shot to the top of the head was the first one. And then they shot him a few more times to make it look like there'd been a fight. We don't really know, but we do know the FBI has to hide something. And they're still out there trying to use this guy to demonize the Tsarnaev brothers and say, well, he was going to sign the confession. Really, he was going to do it. Would never get to court. That's hearsay. But they're out there trying to, yes, this Todashev, he did say, he told us that it was a bad thing and we're going to do that. And, you know, and gosh, he was on the verge of signing the statement when, you know, he just went wacko and we had to kill him. And the story kept changing. The original story was he had a knife. And the Massachusetts police officers who were there said, no, there wasn't a knife. You know, there wasn't anything. And so we're in an age of wet work on there. Now, here's a story that just got sent to me. And it's rather an interesting story. We're still getting the information on this. They're out there still trying to claim, oh, there's massive riots and damage and protests from all these Zimmerman protesters. It's bad. It's racism, blah, 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 blah. Now, the Los Angeles Police Department issued a statement Sunday night that protesters against the Zimmerman verdict stormed a hotel, the West Hollywood Hotel, and vandalized it, causing $15,000 worth of damage. LAPD Commander Andrew Smith told NBC Los Angeles at one point a group of the protesters broke off and went into the W Hotel, committed what I'm told is about $15,000 worth of damage. Spray paint, graffiti, that type of thing, then they left. More on this when we come back from station identification. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about this story that was this statement issued by the Los Angeles Police Department Sunday night that members of one of the protesting groups protesting the Zimmerman verdict broke off and stormed the W Hotel in Hollywood and vandalized it, causing $50,000 worth of damage. LAPD Commander Andrew Smith told this to NBC News Los Angeles, and the story was picked up by media outlets all across America. They're rioting in Hollywood. They're damaging the hotel. The only problem is it did not happen. Managers at that hotel have now gone public via salon.com. No protesters ever entered the hotel. There is no damage. Our guests were not in danger. When they were asked, what about the reports of broken glass? And they said, you look at the windows. Nothing was broken. They're making it up out of thin air. They didn't get the mass riots they wanted. So now they're just feeding it to the media. The corporate media echoes it without question. And it's a complete lie. NBC took this statement from the Los Angeles Police Department, did not bother to check it themselves, and fed it out to the news media, and the news media all across the nation. Oh, those Zimmerman protesters, they're breaking hotel windows over there in Hollywood. Did not happen. They're creating it out of thin air to sell you this idea that the blacks should hate the whites and the whites should hate the blacks, because if you're hating each other, you're not going to pay attention to what the government is doing. Speaking of not paying attention, I'm looking at the Fox News feed. Boy, are they giving a lot of airtime to the royal baby watch. Have they had the baby yet? No, let's go to the sky cam. And here's where the baby will live, and here's where it'll be raised, and it's Kensington Palace, and there all this other stuff. And it's all condensation and distraction. And I don't think it's very well thought out, because, as we reported yesterday, the British government has just told the British people austerity will last another half-century. So I don't think it's a good idea to be waving around all over the corporate media the exalted, enriched lifestyle the royal baby is going to enjoy. They're trying to manage your attention. Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain, says the great and powerful Wizard of Oz here. Alrighty, turning over to Syria. Apparently, one of Assad's main supporters has been assassinated in Lebanon. Unknown gunman shot him about 30 times. Now, I wonder who would do a thing like that. Meanwhile, the Syrian rebels, and it's kind of interesting, these hired mercenaries, they're all over the map here. They're fighting each other. They're not following the agenda. And some of these hired mercenaries apparently walked into the Golan Heights area, which Israel tends to sort of act like it belongs to them, and they captured an Israeli army post. Now, this is going to put serious political complications on Israel that is supposedly supporting the hired mercenaries against Assad. And now you have some of these factionalized hired mercenaries attacking Israel's army posts in the Golan. Now, maybe Israel will see this as an excuse to extend the Golan Heights buffer zone deeper into Syria, but that's a hard sell if it's the rebels who are doing this and not the Syrian government troops. Meanwhile, a spokesperson for the Free Syrian Army, 95% of whom are not from Syria, has announced that Al-Qaeda is going to announce an Islamic State in northern Syria. They're just going to break off the part that they're sitting on right now and say it's a new Islamic State. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah! We'll be right back. More on Syria after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And we're talking about the situation in Syria. Now, as you're probably aware, Israel has been carrying out airstrikes into Syria. The most recent one, back on July 5th, involved, according to Russian sources, was launched from an air base inside Turkey, which is going to cause additional problems and friction for Erdogan, who's dealing with riots and protests in his country. And now, in response to the fact that Israel went and bombed Syria, John McCain and Lindsey Graham are saying that this Israeli attack on Syria underlines the need for the U.S. to go in and start bombing Syria directly. This does not even make logical sense. It's just, well, you know, they've started bombing, let's just join the party, is what they're saying. They're still out there trying to sell you this war on Syria. Syria has done nothing wrong to the United States of America, at least its people. There is no popular uprising in Syria. It is a hired mercenary army. They've been given American weapons and Israeli weapons. They were caught using chemical weapons and trying to blame it on Assad. Classic covert attempt at overthrow. And McCain and Graham are out there saying, yes, we're going to send your children to smash another country in the Middle East that dares sell their oil for currencies other than the dollar and dares to live their life without private central banking. All right, well, John and Lindsay, if you really feel that way, here are your rifles, here are your parachutes, watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call Assad and tell him you are on your way to kick his butt all by yourself. But we, the people of the United States of America, are tired of all these wars for the bankers. We're tired of all the lies about weapons of mass destruction. We know what the game is all about. Wars for the bankers. And our children are worth a lot more than a little pile of gold or silver. And we don't want any part of it any longer. If you want war, help yourself. Goodbye and good riddance. But if you really think this war is so essential, why are you sitting here trying to get our kids to go over there? If you think this war is necessary, go there yourself and fight it for yourself. Leave us alone. Now, meanwhile, John Kerry is out there saying that the gaps are narrowing between Israel and the Palestinians. They're trying to figure out some way to settle that down because Israel's reputation in the world is in major league decline over their continuing abuses against the Palestinians, the land grab going on in East Jerusalem, the constant attacks into Gaza. Israel is just absolutely furious over the European Union requiring an exclusion clause for all business deals with Israel, in that the Jewish colonies illegally built in the West Bank are not to be considered part of Israel, and neither is Gaza. And this is a major problem because Israel does a good business going out into these illegal settlements on land that has cost them virtually nothing, siphoning off resources from the Palestinians to make a product which is then sent back to Israel, gets a Made in Israel label on it, and sold around the world. And the European Union is saying, you can't do that anymore. If it's made in the West Bank, it's made in Palestine. And we want some truth in labeling laws here in Israel, screaming anti-Semite and the usual thing. And apparently the European Union, which has gonadal tissue the American government can only dream of when it comes to Israel, is out there saying that unless Israel settles down this constant warmongering and actually makes progress toward resolving the Israel-Palestine dispute, there will be more sanctions and more punitive measures. And you know, the sick thing about all of this bloodshed and war could have been avoided if right at the start Israel had simply granted to the Palestinians that which Israel demands for itself, recognition of a right to exist. The original United Nations partition plan that was supposed to be the foundation for the creation of the State of Israel simply said there's going to be this piece of land is Israel and this piece of land will be Palestine. And Israel said, no, we want it all. We demand a right to exist, but there's no such thing as Palestinians. And that is the root cause of all the mayhem that has followed since then. Israel is always demanding a recognition of their right to exist. Well, it's reasonable. I don't have a problem with that. But if Israel would simply grant to the Palestinians that same recognition of a right to exist, all of this bloodshed and violence could have been avoided. That's all it would take. On the day that Israel recognizes the right for Palestine to exist, all the tensions will go away, all the bloodshed, all the war. They don't want to do that. Israel's government just has this all-or-nothing mentality. Even the people of Israel don't go along with this. There's protesting in Israel against the government's militarist policies and austerity. The people of Israel aren't happy with the Israeli government. All righty, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike? Last night I was looking at the foreign press, the foreign financial press, and I noticed this Trayvon diversion is much bigger than the IRS scandal in Benghazi.
Well, they're trying to present it as such. They're trying to present it as such.
Well, the bigger issue is the Federal Reserve Bank is getting ready to collapse.
Yes.
And I really think they want to keep that off the front page.
No, absolutely they do. Absolutely they do.
And this Trayvon's just a diversion, trying to play divide and conquer. Because you look at Obama's trying to get the guns. He's going to sign that UN arms trade treaty in August when Congress is not in session, hoping to do an end run to try and enforce this treaty without a ratification. And like I say, everything is failing. They can't get a diversion.
It is failing. The American people are awake to these tactics. And again, the fact they're having to literally make up rioting out of thin air to try and sell this racial discord situation, they've lost the narrative. They've lost control of the minds of America. And, this idea that Obama's going to sign the small arms treaty during the congressional recess, doesn't get him off the hook for requiring ratification. Treaties, under the Constitution, treaties are not legally binding until Congress ratifies it. There have been quite a few treaties signed by U.S. presidents that wind up going nowhere because Congress refuses to ratify. The real danger is that Obama might sign the treaty and then immediately try to implement it via executive order, but that's completely illegal under the Constitution. But you're right. I mean, anybody looking at this government sees they're in thrash mode. They can't recapture the allegiance and trust of the American people. They're trying all these different propaganda trial balloons, trying to regain traction for the war agenda, and it's not happening. And, of course, the more trial balloons they try, the more they're diffusing what is supposed to be the core message of whatever the propaganda is trying to accomplish, and that's why they've lost the narrative.
Well, also, they are scaring the American people with we got 160,000 Russian troops in this country. Mike, I really think that'd be very hard to hide. Because there's too many military people that would probably confirm it. And I talked to some military people. There's no 160. There's Russian troops here, but not 160,000.
Yeah, it's another attempt to try and keep the confusion up, because what the U.S. government sees is the American people coming together and forming a consensus opinion about what to do with a government that is clearly illegitimate.
Yes, but like I say, I see the Federal Reserve collapsing. They got no gold. They just got a bunch of worthless paper. It's a paper tiger. And I see the world pulling away from it. And like I say, if the Federal Reserve is going to collapse, I'll help it collapse. Thank you, Mike.
Well, I would certainly rather see a collapse of the private central banks rather than a nuclear world war to save their gluteus maximi one more time, because it's a tragic, horrible, repeating pattern. Crash of 1907, get out of it with World War I. Crash of 1929, get out of it with World War II. Crash of 2008, the United States has already invaded a dozen nations overtly on 2 continents, technically under U.S. military doctrine. A multi-front war on 2 continents is already a world war. We are into World War III. We haven't had the really big bang where everybody looks up and says, oh, yes, it's a world at war. And, of course, the problem is the United States is already militarily exhausted. This campaign to force the rest of the world back onto Bretton Woods was supposed to conclude in 2008. We're now in 2013. The wars are going badly. Military stockpiles are drawn down. The United States does not have the manufacturing, the manpower, or the money to sustain prolonged conventional war campaigns. And that means if we allow this to go any further, it is inevitable the United States will resort to nuclear weapons as part of their campaign to dollarize the rest of the planet and drag them all back to the petrodollar deal and Bretton Woods. And the world is definitely standing up to that. All righty then, moving right along here. Netanyahu, of course, is still whining and crying and trying to convince the European Union to back off their exclusion clause, and Europe just isn't listening to him. They're sick and tired of his constant whining. And public polls around the world are showing Israel is not well liked or well regarded or well respected. And unfortunately, because of our government's constant obeisance to Israel, the reputation of the United States of America is being dragged down with Israel's. We're basically seen as Israel's enabler. We fund Israel's military. The U.S. taxpayer has been forced to give Israel more than 4 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program to buy weapons to protect Israel. Now we find out Israel is one of the 6th largest weapons exporters on earth. If they've got that much of a weapons industry where they can export and sell, why do they need the American taxpayers to pay to give them weapons? We'll be right back after these words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, yesterday we were reporting on this very bizarre story where authorities in Panama had detected military equipment on a ship flagged for North Korea, coming from Cuba, headed to North Korea, and it just seemed like Cuba doesn't have a lot of weapons, certainly no new ones because of the U.S. embargo, and we didn't have all the information. That turned out to be correct. Apparently, Cuba was sending these weapons to North Korea for repair. These are really old weapons. Cuba can't maintain them anymore, which is a surprise because, you know, the best auto mechanics in the world are those Cuban mechanics because they have to keep their cars running forever because the U.S. will not sell cars to Cuba any longer here, which actually probably would have gone a great deal to deal with the automotive disaster in this country after 2008. Those Cubans would have been lining up to buy American cars. But no, the U.S. government and the CIA, they know how to carry a grudge to ridiculous extremes. So that's what that was all about here. Meanwhile, the United States, not exactly a bastion for honest and trustworthy elections, is out there warning Zimbabwe that they're deeply concerned by the lack of transparency in preparations for the July 31st general election. And the U.S. is calling on Zimbabwe to make sure the vote is peaceful, fair, and credible. Pot calling the kettle black, very much in this case here. And State Department spokesman Patrick Ventrell said elections that were not seen as credible would have implications for U.S. sanctions against Zimbabwe. In other words, what they're saying is, you'd better elect the guy we want, or we will come in and do bad things to you. That's what they're really saying. The United States government, which has institutionalized massive automated vote fraud, election fraud, has no moral grounds to criticize the elections anywhere else in the world at all, let alone issue threats of sanctions if the outcome doesn't match U.S. expectations. We know exactly what they're saying here. You make sure our guy gets in. Probably still reeling from that embarrassment in Egypt, where they went in with massive vote rigging to try and get Mubarak's henchman the job as president of the new Egypt, and Morsi won. Remember how the Elections Commission up there in Cairo was delaying and delaying and delaying the announcement of who won, trying to figure out some way they could sell the people of Cairo that the best friend of the guy they just kicked out was the new elected president, and ultimately they couldn't do it. Morsi won in a landslide. And election fraud can shift an election a few percentage points, but it can't reverse a landslide, no matter how desperate they are. So now the U.S. is throwing its weight around Zimbabwe. You make sure your elections come out the way that we want, or we'll hit you with sanctions. Harumph, harumph, harumph. Meanwhile, over in Athens, once again, the people of Greece are in the streets protesting over more job cut plans. Remember, we were talking about how Greece is being recapitalized again on condition of immediate increase of austerity, cuts to public spending, cuts to services, cuts to public employees. And the people of Greece are tired of dealing with the deterioration of their lifestyles and their country, their streets, their schools, their hospitals, in order to keep the private central bank happy, especially with recognition that half of Greece's debt problem was created through fraud and corruption with this underhanded deal between Papandreou and Goldman Sachs. But the attitude of the money junkies is it doesn't matter if the debt was created through fraud. Debt is holy. Debt is sacrosanct. And you and your children and your grandchildren and their grandchildren will live lives of sacrifice and toil and labor in order to balance the most holy ledger book. And the Greek people have kind of had it with that. And we already know austerity isn't working, certainly isn't working in Greece, because all those fired public workers do not have private sector jobs they can go to. So all of these public cuts, in addition to deteriorating the quality of life and the infrastructure in Greece, are increasing unemployment, reducing tax revenues, and making the problem worse. And we know the original spreadsheet on which the austerity model was based was found to have mistakes in it. Nobody double-checked it before this was used to set national policies. But because bankers and politicians are loath to admit error or misjudgment, they're continuing on with a policy which up to this date has not worked. They're just trying to hold this thing together with spit and baling wire here. Alrighty, we're going to grab a quick phone call here. Mike in Maryland, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Great show as always. Your website is my daily go-to website, one of them for news, and there's an excellent article on there about titled it's a video, Treasury and Federal Reserve and Shell Game Conspiracy Hiding Federal Default. And it's kind of funny how the numbers haven't budged an inch in nearly 2 months. And it's a really good video. Investment Watch posted it. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but we've got to be close to the breaking point now.
We absolutely are. Now, we've got to take a break for commercials. Stay on the line, Mike. I'm going to come back to this topic after these words from our sponsors. America, welcome back to the show. We're going to have to fix the volume on that particular bump here as we head into our adventures in XDS next week here. We're talking with Mike in Maryland, and Mike, as a matter of fact, we did post this to the website and talk about it yesterday, where if you look at the official U.S. Treasury website, it shows the aggregate U.S. government debt as being $16 trillion and change. It is sitting only $25 million below the legal borrowing limit mandated by Congress, and it has been there for something, well, going on 60 days now. Now, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, well, has Uncle Sam found a new sugar daddy somewhere, or what? What gives?
Well, it's obvious they're cooking the books here. I mean, you know, for Congress to stand up and say we're going to raise the debt ceiling again heading into a midterm election season, that's an election loser. And nobody thinks the government has been able to stop borrowing over the last 2 months, so they're simply borrowing and printing money like crazy, and they're not going to tell the American people. That's what's going on.
Yeah, and maybe they can keep this Ponzi scheme or going for another 6 months or a year or two. I don't know how, but I've been saying that for the past 6 years. I want to talk about Hastings briefly, if I may,
Sure.
The tragedy of his death, and other genuine journalists, like the guy that wrote the book about Clinton, or maybe it was Bush, the cocaine thing, Fortunate Son. That's a hallmark of a banana republic where, in essence, we have death squads now that execute prominent people that expose government corruption and tyranny, and I just wonder how much longer will it be before the death squads go to neighborhoods and take out low-hanging activist low-hanging fruit. I don't know quite how to say this.
No, I understand what you're saying. They're going to start working their way down the food chain, and it's a question. Especially with Eric Holder saying, you don't have stand your ground anymore. If somebody's going to come up and kill you, you just let them do it. And that's another reason to take the guns and to prohibit people from protecting themselves, is to leave everybody a victim for one of these government hit squads.
Or criminals that our government stirs up in order to create the chaos. Either way, they win in that regard.
Well, we've talked before about like how so-called civil rights organizations need to have racism in order to secure their funding. The carbon Nazis need carbon and global warming. The ADL needs anti-Semitism, and the police forces need crime. If there was no crime, people would say, okay, we can shut down the police department. So one of the reasons probably we're seeing over in Great Britain, where the police are literally ignoring 45% of all reported crime, is they need those criminals out there, or they're all going to start losing their jobs, and they don't get to put on that impressive uniform with the shiny buttons. They don't get to carry guns and tasers and tear gas around. They don't get to drive around in these big fancy cars with lights and sirens and all the rest of that stuff. The police department needs there to be crime to justify their salaries.
That English gentleman that called earlier was really heartfelt. I really feel for him, and it just seems like we're headed down the same path. Hey, thanks for letting me talk, and keep up the great work.
All right, thank you very much here. And before we get back to the economy, a couple of breaking stories. We've all heard the old saying, if at first you don't succeed, try again. And the George Zimmerman Trayvon Martin case was clearly being fanned up to try and create race riots, to divide America against itself. Didn't work out. And now we've actually caught the LAPD just making up out of thin air stories about violence and rioting. And didn't happen, just made it up. But on that principle of if at first you don't succeed, try again, the U.S. government has already found the next case they're going to use to sell this to you. We have another black teenager, Jordan Davis, was shot to death by, this time, a real white guy, not a Hispanic, real white guy, Michael Dunn, inside an SUV over a dispute about how loud the music these kids were playing. And apparently Michael Dunn is saying, stand your ground. I went out to complain to them about how loud the music was, and I felt threatened by the people inside there, so I had to shoot them. Obviously, it's an absurd case. Obviously, it's an absurd case. But they're already getting ready to say, this is the next stand your ground law. And we know what's going to happen. It's obvious this Michael Dunn acted inappropriately. And the judge is going to give the jury instructions that make it impossible for them to convict him, just like the current jury in Trayvon Martin is already out there saying was going on, just like we saw happen in the trial of the 4 officers who were accused of beating Rodney King. And then they'll come back and say, see, this proves there's racism, we got to burn white, and they'll start the machine all over. They're coming back for another try to create race riots because this government needs Americans divided against Americans. This government would welcome race riots across America. They could declare a national emergency and martial law. They were all ready to go this last weekend. Did not happen. Because you, the American people, are an American people, and you understand these are the dirty tricks this government has a history of playing on us. And they're desperate. They are that desperate. They're coming back again with another case. White guy shoots a black teenager. It's going to be stand your ground. We're going to have another one of these. We're going to crank this one up. They're out there desperate to do that. And by the way, here's a story. We just got this bizarre story that came in where apparently there is an issue with this grocery store in a black neighborhood where one of the consumers noticed the asparagus in the produce section wasn't properly sitting in a tray of water and was dried out and therefore less edible. And he's accusing the market of intentionally having dried out, unpalatable produce because that market is in a black neighborhood. I mean, talk about a stretch and a reach. This is desperation on the cusp of madness. Clearly, the government is throwing a tantrum that they didn't get those race riots they worked so hard to create this last weekend. It's panic time. They're panicking. They're absolutely panicking. Normal common sense with propaganda is, if you try something and it fails, you back away and just say, oh, it's just one of those things. And you wait, if necessary, for years to try it again. Good example, 1993 bombing of the World Trade Towers was supposed to bring a tower down and launch the period of unending war. Tower didn't come down because of the engineers and architects doing a good job, because the van with the explosives in there, which, by the way, remember, the undercover FBI informant inside that group asked for FBI permission to disarm the bomb. to use a harmless powder that he was going to swap for the real explosives, and the FBI told him, no, leave the bomb functional. Tower didn't come on down, kind of came and went. They waited until 2001, 8 years, before they tried that stunt again on 9/11. But here we are. Last weekend, the riots didn't happen. We caught them using bogus videos, bogus claims of riots and protesting. We caught Trash Can Man, obvious posed shot, staged shot, trying to sell violence and riots. Did not happen. And they're already back out here. We've got another white guy kills harmless black teenager. They're going to throw that at you. They're selling this as hard as they can. And to your credit, you, the American people, of all colors, genders, persuasions, religious affiliations, orientations, black, white, yellow, green, red, white, peach, taupe, and mauve, saw through it. And you will see through it again. The only people out there screaming riot, protest are the undercover informants, and this is a good opportunity to take down their names. Guy doesn't want to hear the facts, just wants me to set fire to a building, FBI informant. Put it in your file cabinet. All righty. Let's see. Reprising the story about how the U.S. government was caught paying the protesters after the Trayvon Martin shooting, and no doubt the paychecks are already flowing down here to this new case. All right, back to the economy. We're almost out of time here. David Stockman, author of The Great Deformation, The Corruption of Capitalism in America, is accusing the Federal Reserve of corrupting savings and the stock market by this continued injection of liquidity, or as he calls it, monetary cocaine. Yes, you're going into withdrawal because you're not getting unearned wealth pouring all over your head. We'll give you a shot of monetary cocaine. And it can't keep up. You reach the point where the rest of the world is not going to trust the dollar because of this $85 billion a month that we know of, created out of thin air. Oh, it's a loan. It's a loan to the American people. It's collateralized with the enforced labor of the American people and their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. But the reality is there is now a Treasury bond bubble. There aren't enough living Americans, including those about to be made American citizens through this amnesty program. And even with them, there are not enough Americans to redeem all these Treasury bonds by the time they are supposed to come due. There's a Treasury bond bubble. It's the biggest bubble of all. Nobody wants to talk about it. They're hiding it, just like they're hiding the real debt of the U.S. government over at the Treasury Department for the last 60 days. We are very much at the edge. We're in a race to see what happens first. Complete collapse of the private central banking system, or they succeed in escalating this world war into a full-on nuclear conflict. And a national emergency. Yes, we screwed up the greatest nation on earth, but there's a war on now. You've got to forget all about NSA Gate and Prism Gate and the rest of that stuff. You've got to salute the flag and throw your children onto the designated enemy's bayonets here. Down in Australia, this global Ponzi scheme banking has caught up with them. They're looking at a housing collapse down under, similar to what we went through in 2008. And again, allegations of chicanery with mortgage-backed offerings, collateralized debt obligations. Bank of America reported a 63% profit increase. Remember, we reported yesterday that Goldman Sachs' second quarter earnings had doubled. They're just raking it in. And there's a very revealing comment inside this article saying that Bank of America's claimed profit increase is mostly the result of loan losses from the 2008 mortgage meltdown continuing to shrink. Well, how are those losses shrinking? Very simply, every month the Federal Reserve prints up $85 billion and uses it to buy those bad mortgage bundles off of the banks. They're transferring the losses from the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud from the banks who committed that fraud and got caught onto the American people. And that is economic fascism. We are no longer a capitalist economy. Capitalism is where if you make money, you keep it. If you lose money, you live with that debt and ruination. Socialism is if you make money, it's taxed from you to benefit society. If you lose money, society is taxed to cover the losses so you can stand up and try again. Fascism is a system in which if you make money, you're allowed to keep it. But if you lose money, society is taxed to cover the losses, and that's what they're doing here. That's what all these bailouts and TARP and quantitative easing is all about, transferring the losses from Wall Street onto the American people. Everybody who's out there screaming that the Occupy movement is anti-capitalist, that's completely wrong. We're anti-fascist. We are pro-capitalist. We admire people who grow rich under the original model of capitalism. Steve Jobs, James Cameron, we admire these people. They're very rich. And we're not resentful of their wealth. We admire them because they got their wealth making products, services, movies that we, the people, voluntarily trade our money for. That is capitalism. What we have now is an elite 1% self-appointed banker class that games the system, that rigs the system to give the house a percentage advantage. So no matter what we do, the wealth flows to them. It's not bad enough they turned all of Wall Street into a giant open-air casino. They've turned the entire nation into a giant open-air casino where the odds favor the house. And the wealth flows from the people whose labor creates that wealth to these money junkies. And that's what they're doing again. Bank of America's increase in profits doesn't mean they're running their business any better. It means that they have gamed the system. So the Federal Reserve is buying these mortgage-backed security bundles that they fraudulently sold in 2008 and then were forced to purchase back when the fraud became known, and now they're dumping them on you, the American people. That's what they're doing, and that is fascism. We're incentivizing crime and corruption and fraud on Wall Street. These people don't get punished. None of the major players in the mortgage-backed security fraud were ever arrested, ever investigated, ever certainly not sent to prison. We, the American people, are being punished for their crimes with lowered wages, lowered standard of living, enforced austerity, hunger, homelessness, deteriorating infrastructure. We're being punished for something Wall Street did. Where is the justice in that? Meanwhile, Barclays and 4 of its traders have been fined $453 million for manipulating energy prices. Hey, look what happened with Enron. They got caught. Ken Lay, supposedly, died before he could be sent to jail. He's probably down in the Canary Islands playing canasta. Skilling got sent to prison for 24 years. They just cut his sentence in half. He's going to be out real soon. And because nobody really got slammed for that, nobody passed any laws against it, Barclays went into the same business. We're going to manipulate power prices. We're going to get rich. It just keeps on going. You probably saw this story the other day where they're out there proclaiming that if you delay your retirement, it will delay dementia. That retirement is what brings on Alzheimer's and memory loss and confusion. That's nonsense. Doctors will tell you, if you're getting Alzheimer's, the symptoms show up in your 30s. They're trying to sell you that losing your retirement is a good thing because they spent all your Social Security money and can't put it back. So the new philosophy is we're going to work you until you drop dead and tell you it's good for you. That's what they're saying with this. All righty, we're coming up here on our last commercial break. We're going to take a word for some sponsors from our advertisers who support what we're doing here, and we'll be back with the last segment of the show after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our show today before we get out of here. A couple of stories I wanted to point out here. Earlier today, we were talking yesterday about how there was a video that had leaked out about a drone that crashed into an airplane at an Afghanistan base. Today we have a drone that crashed along US 98 near Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. Apparently started a fire, had to actually close down the highway. These are not reliable pieces of hardware, or the pilots just really aren't that very good because their own butt is not inside that aircraft. Oh, it crashed. Give me another one. So these are proving to be very, very, very dangerous. at a time when the U.S. government is saying, oh, we've got to have drones overhead to make sure that you're behaving properly. The tiny town of Deer Trail, Colorado, on Interstate 70, about 55 miles east of Denver, is considering an ordinance that would authorize licensed bounty hunters to shoot down unmanned aircraft violating its sovereign airspace. That's going to be something to see, you know, some Colorado hunter's trophy room. Here's the elk, and here's the deer, and here's the moose I got, and here's the mountain lion, and here's that predator drone. Just up there on that walnut plaque there on the wall. Wouldn't mind one of those myself for my trophy room, if I had a trophy room, which I don't actually do here. And if there's the thing, you know, American Safari, go on out and bag one of those drones here. Probably a lot of good things inside those drones. I know that America actually put something like 18 kilograms of silver into those cruise missiles, the Tomahawk cruise missiles, all silver wiring and silver contacts. We put more jewelry on our weapons than we do on our wives. Probably all kinds of valuable things inside those drones. Just knock them on down and strip mine them. Help restore the economy that way. All righty, let's see. Up in Toronto, a police officer has been busted for posing as a flood victim. For the media saying, oh, the police are doing a heroic job. Really, the police just did a wonderful job. Turned out he was a cop himself. They caught him on that one. Latest research is now showing that when the police and the public are wearing video cameras, there are 88% fewer complaints of police abuse and 60% less use of force. So having cameras out there does work. Whether it's an overt camera, your cell phone, your Canon digital, or if it's a covert camera like a Zooxi or some of these other sunglasses and pens that have cameras built in, the awareness of the presence of cameras will hold the police abuse in check. This is a good thing. We need to reinforce that. All righty, we're pretty much to the end of the show here, and I want to go back and remind everybody that it looks like the government is getting ready to try a new case to try and fan up the race riots. They didn't get the race riots they were desperate for last weekend. They've already got another case. Black man shoots white teenager under questionable circumstances. We're going to try and understand your ground. They're going to run it through, and they're going to try and they're going to get the guy off to enrage and inflame racial tensions, because they need Americans angry with Americans so that we are not angry with them. Don't fall for it. I rely on you, the Rivero's Rangers, to talk some common sense into those that you know, work with, your families and friends. I hear the music. It's time for us to get on out of here. We're going to be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Please support Republic Broadcasting. Look what we've accomplished. Next Monday, we're on XDS, all because you chipped in and helped us grow. So with that in mind, pat yourselves on the back. Have a good afternoon, and aloha, America.